Right, team, me and Jasper sit down today to discuss overtraining versus under recovery. We wanted to give you guys some takeaways and some understanding around if you are overtraining or what to do with your recovery to make sure overtraining doesn't occur. I think a lot of people you'll hear talk about, oh, are you overtraining? Or, oh, systemic fatigue. Oh, these different fancy words that come up within the industry. But as someone, a person who doesn't know too much about fitness, trying to understand how do I know if I'm overtraining or not is something we discussed today. So bear with the episode as we start to kick into it, because I think there should be around halfway through a lot of tools for you to be able to apply to yourself and a lot of takeaways from this one. You can find any of us on Instagram. You can find me at Hat the Body, Hat the Mind. You can find Jasper at Jasper Skule. You can find Mark at Mark Origin Series. Chris at _symbiotic_chimp. Don't ask me to spell symbiotic. You can follow the gym as well at Origin Athletic Fitness. Instagram's probably the best way you can find us all. These podcasts go up on YouTube, so if you are listening to this, you can head over to my YouTube at Hat the Body, Hat the Mind, and you can watch the videos there if you want to see us. I wouldn't advise it. We all have faces for radio. We also don't have voices for radio, but hey, we're trying. So enjoy this one. Let us know if you did get any benefits out of it by either sharing this on your stories and tagging all of us in it. Oh, you can tag at the Real Coaching Radio podcast on Instagram as well. But 5-star rating and review is great. Nothing less, nothing more, because I don't do any more. Thank you so much, guys. Enjoy this episode. Welcome to Real Coaching Radio, the podcast for coaches by coaches. We are here to teach you how to get the most out of your clients and yourself. This is where beauty meets the beast, brains meet brawn, and science meets, well, bro science. Welcome to Real Coaching Radio. What I want to try and do in this episode is try and give people almost questions they can ask or a checklist for them to think about when it comes to how they know if they're overtraining or not, or if they're undertraining. Because I think, and part of me doing this is me voicing my thoughts as they come to me a lot of the time, because when it comes to understanding if you're doing too much or doing not enough, I feel like someone who's into their training is constantly asking that question, because it's quite difficult for people to know, I think. Yes, there's this stimulus to fatigue ratio that we're always looking for, but it's really hard to know that is what I'm doing working. Yeah. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
For you, do you have anything that you dictate off of to make sure that actually what I'm doing is working?
In the recent times, definitely just off how I feel body, physically.
Yeah.
A little bit mentally, but if you had a bad night's sleep and you're just a bit unmotivated, you can still have a good session. So mentally for me is less of a factor, much more physically.
Yeah.
We did heavy deadlifts on Tuesday. I'm still a bit drained from it, back's still a bit tight, so I'm going to change what I do today. I'm still going to train.
Yes.
But change what I'm doing.
So that's interesting, because the fatigue you get from a deadlift, then how? Because you said then you can feel it, but you can also feel it. Do you know what I mean? Without getting
in my soul
emotional.
No.
Body can feel it, but mentally
I'm tired today. Yeah. Definitely CNS fatigue. But as long as I'm not lifting heavy today, it's going to be a little bit of volume, a little bit of speed work. So I can do that. We're meant to be doing a bit of speed deadlift stuff, and it's my erectors are still got DOMs. They're not hurting. They're just tight. I Olympic lift yesterday and changed it slightly because just pulling off the floor was uncomfortable.
Okay.
Yeah. So. Yeah, that's that. Well.
Yeah. No, I just find it interesting, because when I speak to clients about making sure we're going in the right direction, it's always trying to get them to be in tune with their body, and that's really difficult at the start. So performance and going off of how are we progressing is the first kind of protocol when looking at someone's program if what we're doing is working. If we're moving in the right direction that we should be, then we're doing the right amount. Yes, you may be coming into a session feeling a bit fatigued, but if that starts to then become a point where you're stupidly fatigued to the point you can't actually do the exercises, that's when we go, right, are we doing too much? Are we not? Is there components with your rest that we can look at? And that's kind of what I want to almost explore today, would be, what are the components that go into you checking, yes, your body's feeling sore, but how do I know that, yes, my body's sore, but I'm actually all right to train? What would you say?
I think that if you go, let's say you got sore legs or sore glutes from a session previously, not so sore that you can walk around and, function. When you're so sore you can't walk down the stairs, you probably need a rest day. But if you're just feeling a bit tight, I'd go in and warm up, because I'm sure you're the same, but I've had sessions which have been absolutely cracking, and I've just felt a bit sore to start with. But if anything, because you can feel that muscle, let's say you got like sore quads, but you start squatting or deadlifting, you can feel that working, that it almost gives you something to work off that feeling. Because sometimes the bigger lifts, you're just moving the weight and things are getting fatigued, but it's not like a isolation exercise where you can feel one particular thing working. So I think give yourself that warm-up space, and maybe like up to 50% of what you're doing, and then go off that.
And as well, trying to figure out, when you're picking the days that you choose, when you go in to do, when your legs are sore, is that because the exercises that you've picked or the leg days you've got are in close succession to each other? So do you need to spread out that recovery time and maybe train something else in between? That's something I look at. Do you ever look at that? Or I suppose this be interesting actually, because for me, the way my programming goes is basically I do lower body session on a Monday. So I deadlift on a Monday. I then do lower body session on a Wednesday, and then I do another lower body session on a Saturday. Now there's gaps within that, but I'll come to that deadlift session and be ruined because of the squats I did on the Saturday. So this week I'm changing it, so the squats I'm doing on a Friday rather than doing them on the Saturday, to see if that extra time gives me enough time to recover to be able to go back in. With all of your Olympic lifting and stuff like that, that's got to be harder for you to judge, right? Because how many times a week are you Olympic lifting?
Only twice at the moment. Well, I'm actually going to make it 3 times a week.
Yep.
Just to make it more applicable for myself rather than the general Origin method programming we're following.
Yep.
So I'm going to do Saturdays just like a technique day. I find it's almost, don't get me wrong, if your body's fucked, you're not going to lift well.
Yep.
But having fatigue legs, as long as you can manage your expectations going into the session, a lot of the Olympic lifting stuff is technical, so as long as you can still physically move correctly, and your legs aren't so sore, your back's not so tired that you can't keep position, that you just lift a little bit lighter potentially. Whereas it's probably for you slightly harder if you've got fatigue legs trying to go into a max triple or heavy this or volume deadlifts and that kind of thing.
And that's I think that's part of it as well, is like when it comes to figuring out if you're overtraining or not, it depends what you're doing and it depends your goals you're trying to aim at. Because if you're going through specific phases where we're trying to build up volume, because I haven't been used to volume, because I've been so focused on the intensity of like my exercise and trying to lift maximally, it means that when it comes to me having volume, it's such a shock to my body. So it's part of it is just the acclimation phase as you go into something new. And if you program it correctly and you're not stupid like I was and just jumping straight into 4x5 at 80%, then you'll be able to like accustom yourself to it and your body will catch up almost. And it's like, when it comes to deciding what your goal is, will also help you to figure out if you're overtraining or not. Because sometimes having sore muscles, if you're trying to gain muscle, for example, 9 times out of 10, if your split is right, having sore muscles is probably a good sign, and you're probably not overtraining. It's when we start to get into the more strength-focused sports, Olympic lifting and powerlifting, where it becomes, right, well, now we need to be more managing of our stress to then give us the ability to come in and lift heavy again. You can train a different muscle part that's not sore when you come in to do like muscle building, when you're trying to build hypertrophy, when you're trying to gain hypertrophy and trying to build muscle. But when it comes to you trying to build strength, like, to me, perfect example was Wednesday. All I did was squat, some single leg toe touches, and like 2 sets of crunches, and left. I had like Romanian deadlift program, some back rack lunges, some adductor work. But it's like, for the goal, that's kind of one of the ways that I brought the fatigue down.
Yeah.
So mental fatigue alongside training, how would you describe that?
What do you mean by
So kind of like because it's kind of like CNS fatigue. How would you explain that my muscles aren't hurting, but I myself am physically drained because I've deadlifted this week, back squatted this week. My quads are fine today, but after that Wednesday session, I couldn't speak.
So the best way I reckon I could describe it to general population and, you know, people that maybe aren't as experienced in the gym, is it's like the day after a hangover. So you've gone out for a crazy night. The next day, you know you're going to be ruined. You know, you spend all day in bed. You feel like shit. But then the next day, you don't feel bad, but you're just like drained. You're just low on energy. So it's essentially that, you know, if you've squatted heavy or done a big, like, just gym session in general, the next day, you actually might not be sore, but, you know, potentially going to be sore.
Yeah.
But it's just like a drain on your whole system.
Yeah.
You know, if you think about a game where you've got an energy bar, if you overuse that energy in the day before, you're not going to, even with like 8 hours sleep and good recovery, replenish that energy bar.
Yep.
So you're going to just be like a little bit more fatigued for the week.
Yeah. So the effort levels you're putting into your sessions will be what dictates the amount of like energy drained from you and the fatigue that you're starting to accumulate. So as we start to go into strength work, for example, part of the reason I pulled out those other exercises the other day was because what is my intent of the session and what am I trying to get in my overall goal, but how can I reduce that fatigue? And a lot of that can come from, like, you have your local fatigue and you've got like systemic fatigue. So you get local fatigue around your muscles, around like your quads, your glutes, when you're training like doing back squats, for example. Then you got systemic fatigue where your whole system is ruined from working up to heavy loads. And that's because, like, think of it this way, the best way to think about it, when you're getting stronger and you're going up towards like what is close to your true 1 rep max, right? So like 80 to 90% of your true 1 rep max and above, that is extremely taxing on your central nervous system and on your system in general, because you've got to send a lot more signals to get your body to move the weight. If you want to think about it in a really easy way, think of every time we're getting closer towards that like 1 rep max, I've got to tell my muscles to contract quicker. I've got to send stronger signals for contraction. So I've got to be able to tell my body to do that. And every time I start to go towards that top end, that's going to be a lot harder systemically rather than locally. When we start to go into like rep ranges of like 6 to 12, even plus from that, and we're kind of working on like the hypertrophy rep range, or like going for more endurance, more like, think lactate, that burning sensation, that's going to be more local fatigue, right? So I like to think when it goes into these types of things, systemic and mentally, is if you're working close towards your 1 rep max and you're feeling this day after a hangover, that's the mental fatigue that I kind of talk about. What other things do you think people can do to check whether they are overtraining? Because I like I said, performance for me is a big one. Do you go off of that at all?
Yeah, you know, if you've got numbers that you know you should be hitting and you're not hitting them, it probably is overtraining, but arguably it's not necessarily overtraining, it's just under recovering.
Right. So this is, yes, good.
Because you'd have to, you know, the human body can go through, you know, crazy amounts of exercise. You know, people push themselves through ultra marathons, and, you know, the human body will adapt to pretty much any scenario you put it in. But I find that most people, when they come to the gym, the next day they're sore, whatever, you know, they wouldn't be as sore if they'd eaten as much as they should have done that same day they was training, eating well afterwards. Even just stuff like hydrating enough and sleeping enough will make a huge difference.
Yep. And I think that's going off of that. That's where when you're not looking at those other things of recovery, that's where overtraining seems to like spike right up. Because you talk about going out drinking, that's going to affect your ability to recover. Things along the lines of, I know you'll hear a load of people say nutrition, sleep, alcohol. What's other forms of recovery that people would talk about?
Did you say alcohol?
Yeah, as in like bad. As in
right.
like to be aware
that doesn't
of.
help recovery.
Yeah, alcohol doesn't help recovery, but like to be aware of what other things are there. Sleep, food, alcohol, all things that affect recovery. Stress levels.
Yeah, stress levels. I mean, I would probably say those are probably the main ones.
Yeah.
People will find that they have, like if you're dehydrated, that's going to have an effect on like how much like glycogen your muscles can hold and that sort of thing. So there's all sorts of little things.
Yeah. But big factor wise.
But the big factor, yeah. I actually, so deadlifted heavy on Tuesday. Wednesday, my back was sore. Thursday, I did a little bit of training. Didn't feel too bad. Didn't do a huge amount. I feel worse today because I did the early morning shift. So got up at 4:30.
So lack of sleep.
Yep.
Yep.
I was actually quite dehydrated this morning.
Yep.
Because I didn't want to drink loads before I went to bed because I didn't want to wake up in the middle of the night needing a wee. So I feel worse today because of lack of sleep and probably dehydrated a little bit than I did on Thursday, which was like the day after, like 2 days after the heavy lift. So
yes, and that's the thing of going into when we talk about like overtraining versus I guess under recovering, it would be checking balances, checking boxes in the sense of can you create an environment which is very, very stable in the sense of can you keep your sleep almost the same amount of time? Can it be the same wake and sleep cycle? And the reason I go on about sleep so much is that's the one thing that affects me mentally and physically the most. Because if I'm tired, one, I can't think straight, can't think properly. I'm way over emotional if I don't get my sleep. But I'm also find it way harder to produce strength and to feel like I can have good conversations with people, but also to then go and put the effort levels into training. So if you can keep that consistent and then keep your nutrition consistent, keep your hydration levels almost consistent as you can be, what tends to happen over stuff like this, same as stress, you'll start to get this environment which is the same day to day, so you can then start to figure out what else is going wrong. And that's something that I like to kind of push clients towards when it comes to any diet or anything like that is, can you create a thing, a meal plan? Can you create a routine? Can you create a structure around your life which keeps it pretty much the same? Because then it's easier for us to then see the deviations and the reasons why we're overtraining. Because like for me, I've started a new program. What are the reasons that I've overtrained? What are the reasons that I feel really fatigued, tired, and don't feel up for training? Well, those reasons are going to be, I haven't had the best sleep this week, but then also I've been ill. Oh, that's a deviation from the normal pattern. And it's like, my sleep hasn't been so bad compared, like I normally get 7 hours, I've been getting 6.5. Not going to make as much of a difference as, oh, there's like masses of flu going around at the moment. So it's like keeping things consistent and being like diligent with those things will then give you the easy answer of, well, it's that.
Yeah. And I think having that consistency within your life, even if your recovery is not perfect, will actually allow you to dial in on whether you're overtraining or not. Just to contradict myself,
go on.
I feel like, saying that you can't overtrain under recover is probably true for most people, because most people don't pay a huge amount of like attention to their diet, their hydration, their sleep.
Yeah.
They just go to the gym because they think it is good to do, but it's that separation between going and just exercising and trying to produce results for a performance in, let's say, like getting stronger, getting fitter, building muscle. So I think it is vital that you dial in those aspects of your recovery to then monitor your overtraining.
Yes.
So like it is that you can overtrain. That's entirely true. But most of the time that you've not done too much in the gym, you've just not done enough outside of the gym to recover from what you've done, if that makes sense.
And that's the thing of when it comes to you figuring out what that is, you need to keep most things consistent. A good example of this is an elimination diet. When people think they have intolerances to certain foods, or there's certain foods which either spike certain things within their body, like inflammation and things like that, basically what you start to do in an elimination diet is remove every single food and keep maybe 3 foods within your diet. And then we keep them the same and see what happens to these inflammation, to the tiredness feeling. We keep all of that the same, and then we start to add in other components. Once we start to then get those feelings come back, oh, I added in, I don't know, bananas this week. That seems to have spiked my inflammation. There's some intolerance there. And it's the same with this type of thing coming training wise. If you can keep everything consistent, then we start to increase the amount of training, the amount of work we're doing. You can then start to see what component of that is actually making a difference. Is it because I've gone from intensity to volume and I wasn't ready for it? Is that what I've done? Have I overshot with my weights that I thought I was going to do? It's a lot easier to say it's overtraining when you've got everything else consistent.
Yeah.
So performance is something that we're going to go off of when it comes to gaining strength and even anything within the gym. If your performance starts to decrease, that's going to be a real big sign that you are overtraining. Say we've just got, I'll tell you what we'll do. We'll go back to the recovery. Let's just give people a quick, this is what we mean by consistent. This is what we mean by that. So if you go off of hydration, what is consistent for people?
In terms of how much they should be drinking?
Yeah, so give some like rough guidelines on how much they should be drinking, but then also like what's a way I can make sure I'm being consistent with my...
I mean, get yourself a water bottle. That'd be the big one. I can't remember off the top of my head how many glasses of water or like liters you're going to drink a day. It's like maybe like 2.
Yeah, so I think standard advice is 2. I always go to like, if you're someone who trains, try and drink a liter while you're training.
Yeah.
Because like for me, especially endurance wise, but for me, the hydration is such a big...
Oh, even just sweating in the gym.
Yeah, and just lifting weights. So I would always push people towards like at least 2 liters. Probably need to be 3 to 4.
Yeah.
And then get yourself a water bottle.
I'd get a water bottle. One, you can just carry water with you. There'll be so many opportunities where you're in the car or on the train and you're like, I could do with a drink, and you can just have some water. And then that, you get bottles that have got the mils written on it, and you can get huge ones, and then you can track how much you're drinking, or just go, right, I need to drink 2 or 3 full water bottles on top of other liquids you might drink, like juice or coffee and tea, because that does count as water.
On top of that.
Yeah, on top. Because obviously if you just drink coffee, it's not great for you. It is technically still water.
Yeah. But it dehydrates the shit out of you as well.
So I'd get a water bottle to be able to track
what you're drinking and drink on top. Make sure that you're tracking your water, not just everything else alongside it. So like
everything else is just extra.
Yeah, and that would be a good way to think about it. I almost push people to like, yes, you can have these other things, but again, you need to make sure you're getting your water. When it comes to sleep,
so I got an iPhone, and on my iPhone I can set like a bedtime for the same time every time. So like mine's just set at 7 o'clock in the morning, just because that's like generally quite a good time for me to get up. Obviously my week's not the same week in terms of times I get up. I'm sure lots of people's like everyone else's isn't. So I chose 7 just as like, maybe 4 days out of the week, I get up at that time, and then I change it for, earlier starts, later starts, lions, whatever. But I can like scroll the dial on my phone so it alerts me 9 hours before I'm getting up to like go to bed. One, so that I'm at least getting into bed. It gives me like an hour to get into bed to get 8 hours. It also puts it on like a sleep mode so that I think there's only like 2 or 3 people that the messages actually buzz on my phone overnight if something's important going on.
Yeah.
Otherwise, like everything else is just blocked off.
And that's the thing. That's the consistency.
Yeah, I'm trying to go to bed at the same time or for the same amount of time within my schedule. There's no distractions.
How many hours are you aiming for?
I try and get 8, sometimes 9.
Yeah.
But I try to aim for those larger hours so that it's more like 7, sometimes 8.
Your boy's running off of coffee and dreams, to be honest. Getting up at 5:15, like set my alarm for 5:15. But I'm the same though. Use that bedtime app. If you've got an iPhone, if you don't have an iPhone,
I'm sure other phones do it.
Well, even if they do, why haven't you got an iPhone? To be honest,
yeah, they are superior. But then lots of if you look at like high level, just take CrossFit athletes because that's the main people I follow. A lot of those guys will do, no phones 2 hours before bed or an hour before bed or just no blue light in general. So there's lots of little things you can do to optimize your sleep time. So even if you can only sleep 6 hours, it's got to be cool.
Yes.
It's got to be dark.
Yep.
You don't want any distractions. So whether that's you need an eye mask or like earplugs or something like that so that the quality of your sleep is just important as the time you're asleep.
So what we've been doing, here's a few. I have a Lumi lamp, which basically, so it helps.
Woken up like a princess.
Yeah, it helps SADS as well. So SADS like seasonal affective disorder, especially in the UK. If you suffer with that and you suffer with like low mood and stuff like that, a lot of that comes from the lack of sunlight. So what the Lumi lamp does is it has this kind of sunrise, sunset effect on it. So having that next to my bed means that when I actually am going to sleep, as I'm reading next to it, the light goes from this bright white light to this basically orange reddy glow. And it starts to like dim as we go down towards bed half an hour before. When you wake up, it does the same thing, just opposite coming up. That's been really helpful. Reading before bed, for me, settles me down. But having something where you're not staring at your phone to settle you down is great. So Jess uses the Calm app and we'll have either like some like, I think brown noise, whatever that is compared to white noise, but we'll have some kind of noise or like a trickle of a stream, which makes me want to pee. So we've had to change the ones with birds in as well, because that tells me it's morning. But something along those lines of like, I use blue blocking glasses purely because I'm in front of my screen the whole time. As soon as I've had dinner, they go on. And it's like, I can start to be more consistent with the times I'm going to sleep, to make sure that my bedtime routine, yes, it's not going to be the same every time. Last night, crawled into bed like 10 minutes after getting off my laptop, but consistently trying my best to use those things when I'm going to sleep. And that just seems to like you said, the quality of your sleep will improve. I've even gone round and like covered up all the little like blue and red lights coming off of things. Makes a big difference. It does, and like I'm a princess with my sleep purely because I know how it affects me. So I think like that's also something to be aware of with yourself. Is like part of overtraining is knowing what affects you, and like what would you say for you affects you the most. Mine's definitely my sleep. I can train and function without food, but sleep, can't do it.
I'd probably agree with you on the sleep side. That's the most notable difference I find. I find I get affected if I'm dehydrated. It tends to come hand in hand with sleep.
It does, yeah.
But sometimes, like, I always get up early on Monday. Like, I'm always in first thing for Monday morning shift to teach classes, and I'll get to the afternoon when I'm training, and I get like really hot, like silly hot, and like just feel uncomfortable when I'm training. Yeah. Because I'll be a little bit dehydrated from like not having that much sleep, like loads of classes, not really having time to drink, then trying to train. And I remember we were doing like small off at one point, and I was doing loads of squats, and I thought I was going to die. I was so warm, and every set I thought my face was going to explode, and it was just awful. So I have to make like a proper effort that as soon as I get to the gym in the morning, I've just left some like hydration tablets in my box.
Yeah.
Put that in a water bottle, drink that during the first classes at least. Before I touch any coffee, because I find as soon as I start sipping on coffee or rains, unfortunately, sometimes early in the morning, I lose. It almost like tricks my body into thinking that's water. And I'll have a cup of coffee, I won't be as thirsty, which is not the same as drinking a bottle of water.
So the hydration tablets, because you said before about the salt and how like, because the hydration tablets have salt in, or is it?
I think so. Yeah, I've not looked at the back of them,
but that'll help like to basically make sure you're actually getting hydrated. So yours is basically rains then. The lack of rains is what you feel affects you the most.
Always. That's why it's a 2 rain day most days.
I'm side note, but really, I'm doing all right with not drinking energy drinks. Yeah. Like I'm trying not to go and buy as many coffees.
Mine's 100% psychological. The other day, when Thursday when I was lifting, I had a couple of sips of the first one, and I'd basically finished training, so I had half a rain left.
Yeah.
I don't even drink it and then train. I just drink it whilst training. But
that just goes into play of how much mentally can affect your training, and that's why sleep and dehydration ultimately your brain is made up of water. Yeah. So sleep and dehydration are going to give you the same effects of basically poor cognition and being able to function properly.
And if you feel lethargic and feel like shit and you're trying to lift heavy, you're not motivated, you don't feel good, you're not going to have that same intention for the lift. So, you're physically capable of lifting a 90% single, let's say, but if you're not with it and not up for it, it feels 10 times heavier.
Yeah. And so another reason things seem 10 times heavier is when people always talk about you can't gain strength when you're in a diet. And I think this goes on to the nutrition side of stuff. I think you can gain strength while you're in a diet. I've done it multiple times. When I did my 205 squat, I was coming out the back end of a diet. Yeah. And I think, I'm currently in one the same now. And it's just, when it comes down to your nutrition, we've talked about you need to be eating enough, but you also need to be eating at the right times and the right amount and the right foods, because that will go into keeping your nutrition consistent. And that's the thing with all of this stuff, is if Monday you have leftover food from the weekend that you're taking into work, and then the next day your breakfast is porridge, you grab a sandwich from the shop, and then for dinner you have a microwave meal, but then the day after that you bring instead of porridge, I'm having a bacon sandwich with egg in. You're changing your diet so much that it's really hard to be well, what gives me energy? What gives me the right fuel I need to train? So I would say if you can be consistent, even if you are in a diet, if you're planning around where you're having your foods, you should be able to see if your diet's affecting your training or not. Because mine doesn't tend to, if I'm having carbs before I train.
Yeah.
As soon as I go to a point of I know I eat a lot of carbs towards the later end of the day. So for me, normally, if my training's in the morning, I'll have to have carbohydrates, but I won't eat carbs until lunchtime, because then I'll train at 2. So it's being able to plan, actually I'm going to have carbs running up to my training sessions, or if I'm early morning training, I'm going to have carbs in my evening meal to make sure I'm going into it kind of for the next day. Some of those things are going to help whether your training is going to be optimal and whether you're going to be able to recover from that. Any what do you recommend with recovery for nutrition?
Make sure you're eating enough.
Yep.
We had a conversation with Kristen about he was trying to gain weight and get enough calories.
But also one of your clients around kind of just making sure that you're eating enough so your performance is improving. Because if you're coming into a session feeling tired and your sleep's okay, your hydration's all right, what about your nutrition?
Yeah, so I mean, I don't want to say track calories, because it can be intense and it can be a bit too much for people. Be aware of how much protein you're consuming for recovery and muscle building, but also a bit like what you said, having carbs before.
Yeah.
Just to give you that energy. And even if you know that, maybe you've eaten enough that day, but you're still a little bit hungry, but you've got a big session tomorrow, having a little bit more in the evening before that next day will mean you'll wake up with more energy. Technically, in your system, you might not feel like it for that bigger session. So if you're not a big morning person for food, make sure you eat enough the night before, so that you're not trying to eat something you wouldn't normally eat before you go and train. The calories don't disappear, they don't just fall out of you overnight. So
that's really good as well, because if you think, the reason we're saying carbs and protein, so think of protein is helping you build muscle, carbs is our energy source. So those two things are going to kind of really aid in the process of any performance that we're looking for, whether that's muscle building, weight loss, whatever it is. there's going to still need to be able to perform within the gym. So that's what we're looking forward to do.
And unfortunately, as boring as it is, and we live like robots, just off the same schedule every day, getting into a rhythm of when you sleep, when you eat, what you eat, just makes you feel so much more like in tune with yourself. Like when I used to load of trampolining, you don't really want to eat anything close to jumping because you can literally feel it like going up and down inside you. It's awful. So I used to get into sort of like weird eating routines where I'd eat, get up at 7 or 8, let's say, go to work, eat during the day, have my last meal at 4 o'clock, and then not eat again till like 11 when I finish training in the evening.
Yeah.
Because most of the time I'd be coaching from 4 till 7, then train 7 till 9:30 or 7 till 10. So I'd eat at 4 to get some food in. And that was far enough away from training that I could digest it. But just close enough that I wouldn't feel like I was hungry getting to the session.
But even that though, you're managing the times that you eat. I've got clients who will be like, "Oh, I was so shit and didn't perform well at the gym today." It's like, okay, so yesterday you had a full day's worth of eating. Today you've ate nothing. Yeah. And it's just so simple, and that's why we talk about consistency with things, because you're trying to then be able to manage. All right, which one is it that is causing me the problems now? Yeah,
and likewise, people will have a rest day, so think they don't need to eat as much, eat basically nothing, and then have no energy for their gym day the next day. And it's like, there you can fluctuate your calories like that, but you do still need to consume stuff.
Yes.
Because most people's base calories are like 1,500 plus.
Yeah. And that's the thing as well. So as we start to look through this, we've gone through kind of keep and sleep kind of the same 7 to 9 hours. We're looking at nutrition being consistent as it can be. When it comes to kind of things like stress, really difficult one to manage, because the world doesn't allow us to live the same day over and over again and manage our stress in a way where, well, I'm not going to do the stressful things, or I'm not going to get that text from my parents, or I'm not going to get that text from a client with all of these problems. Like, managing your stress to me comes down to a few things. Sleep's going to be obviously one of them, but then having ways to get you into like your parasympathetic nervous system. So when you think about the two different types of nervous systems we have like a parasympathetic and a sympathetic state. Your sympathetic is your fight or flight, and if you're highly stressed, chances are you're going to be in that state because you're basically ready to deal with all of these problems, and you'll be very pumped up, very like kind of blood boiling, ready to go. But if you have a constant level of stress from certain things in your life and you don't have a way to brawl yourself out of them, that's when we're going to start to see performance not only drop, but like your state as a person, your health will just start to decline massively as well. So when we look at these different things, I always like to think of your sympathetic is when you're getting ready for a heavy lift and you're like hyping yourself up and you're getting yourself going. Yes, we need to be able to do that for performance, but we also need to be able to pull ourselves right back down. So I use things like reading before bed, finding something within my day which I know calms me right down. And I think that's something that a lot of people don't do, is they're not conscious of these things. And that's just managing your stress. Yes, you can't manage the things that happen to you, but if you can find something which makes you feel calm and makes you feel better, whether that's the sauna, whether that's a bath, whatever that is, to really calm you down, I think that's a really good way to manage stress, and it will help recovery. If you think of these two nervous systems, your sympathetic and parasympathetic, sympathetic being fight or flight and parasympathetic being your rest and digest. It's called rest and digest for a reason, because it kind of, think of this as signaling. Your sympathetic is run away, like get ready to move and action. That is pumping blood. That is cortisol levels spike. That is like get your shit ready to go. Think of your parasympathetic as, right, I'm going to now divert all of that energy to recovering these things. And if you can start to realize that, oh, I've got to be able to go, but I've also got to be able to zen, like that's the perfect combination. It's called rest and digest for a reason, because it diverts things to those areas. There you go. That's my bit of science there. Overtraining. I don't think most people will be overtraining. Looking for like, yes, local fatigue, are my legs hurting? Probably not a good time to train legs today. Might move that to the next day. have I got all of my other things in line? My nutrition, my sleep, my hydration. Is my stress levels managed in some sort of way? All right. Am I overtraining? Could be. That's the question. And I think, like, as a caveat to this, if you're training 3 times or less in a week, you won't be overtraining. Yeah. Just like from my experience, there's no chance. I can push you really hard in 3 sessions, yes, but you've got so much recovery within that. By the time the next session comes around, you're not overtraining.
Well, obviously, we're going to sit down as a 4 and talk about things we think people should be doing in training.
Yeah.
So without trying to touch on that too much, obviously we've talked about overtraining. Most people probably aren't overtraining. Probably most people aren't getting enough of a stimulus.
Yep.
What couple of things could people be doing to get close to that middle ground of, like, they're not, something's better than nothing, but they could be probably close to this optimal range, and they're not as close as they think they are to this red zone of overtraining.
So, I guess not getting close. I would look at it as, like, I would almost look at it as not maybe not a dial, but maybe look at it as if we think of these like energy meters, if we think of you've got a stress one as well. If you think of turning that up to the 10 when you're doing movement. So think of like an RPE scale. So we use an RPE scale to rate how hard a lift was, right? So if we're using that to rate that, if I'm at a 10, that was really difficult. If I'm pushing my training to a 10, you can do that, but you can't do it all the time if your recovery's not a 10, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So I guess along the body side of it, like, you stretch a lot, don't you?
Yeah, I try.
So like things recovery wise like that probably would aid and would help. There isn't anything that I know that I do to do that. I should probably stretch more, and I think I need to get a bit more soft tissue work on, like, my shoulder. Those are the 2 things that as I get to this more advanced level, like, not that I'm advanced, but as we're heading and aiming towards that more advanced level, are things I'm going to have to take into consideration.
Yeah.
So it's just like looking after your body in a certain sense is just managing the amount of effort you're putting in and making sure it matches the amount of recovery you're putting in. Anything else?
I think that's probably it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, that was fun because I think hopefully you've got something out of that when it comes to working things out. Be consistent again with your sleep, your nutrition, the amount of times that you're trying to reduce stress, keep your hydration levels to a certain level. When it comes to overtraining, just monitor what you're adjusting within your training and the effort you're putting in. If everything is really, really hard, how long can you sustain that? And that's the thing of, like, we're not going to go into peak in intensity and volume because that's a completely different thing. That does obviously go into it when thinking about how much work you're doing and if you're overtraining. But for now, think of your recovery and make sure you can try to keep things consistent as you can. As you start to go forward, then we can see if you're overtraining or under recovering. Thank you for tuning in. We will see you on the next one. The intros are not going well, gang, I must admit at the moment. I'm not going to spend long on this outro. Hopefully you're enjoying hearing and seeing a lot more of us. We're going to be putting more information and more podcasts out. I'm going to say the start of March. We're going to aim for 2 a week. Everyone's eyebrows raise. We've tried to make this consistent as possible. If I can stick with 1 a week, that's what we're going to do. If there's anyone you want us to interview as well, by all means get in contact with us and let us know. If there's any questions that you guys have, go to Instagram. You can message any of us, but probably the best place to go would be to @RealCoachingRadio. If you message us any questions you've got or any topics you want us to discuss, we'll try and get on them as quick as possible. But thank you so much for tuning in, guys. We will see you on the next one.